So now we're going to go to the last theme. Remember, guys, 2 minutes because we want to have plenty of time for Q&A. So the last theme is maneuvering tensions between optimism and pessimism for the anthropological discipline. What lies in its future? So we look back, we reverse the gaze, now we're looking forward. And I believe that the text Reverse Gaze can help us with this endeavor of looking forward. Throughout Reverse Gaze, Mwenda, you convey this tension as far as your love and disenchantment for the field. And in the end, you make recommendations to push the fields forward. And when I say the fields, I mean African anthropologies and American anthropology. So briefly, everyone gets 2 minutes. So could you elaborate on this? And I invite all the speakers to discuss this tension in the field between this optimism that you have for it and this pessimism and how we can move forward. Mwenda, you can.
Thank you, Nadej. I am very optimistic for the future of the discipline because of the tools that it helps develop. And I think as Tayo started by saying, anthropology allows you to study people in their own terms. That optimism has to be pushed by a focus on current affairs. And so that allows us now to breathe into the things that are happening now, bring the depth of analysis that anthropologists bring so that we can tease out some of those nuances that get lost, I think, in the fastness of things. The discipline will have to expand. The discipline will have to accommodate many, many voices, opinions, perspectives, theoretical approaches. The discipline may also allow for expanded ways of sharing what we would call the products. I think while we would want to have sort of the flagship journals, there should be other ways of doing this that are also highly respected. So we don't have the hierarchies of if you don't publish in this journal, you're not as highly ranked. It should allow for continuous conversations in those products. So some living forum that allows for people to go back 2 years back and see what was this discussion and today without closing that conversation, but also allowing people to speak into the past texts, as I think Faye aptly mentioned, and bring out the best of them and also show how they can be improved. I'm not sure, though, if we can be as forthright as we would want to be, especially as we continue to see the dwindling in terms of resources to support research. And so, again, maybe we need to use the less expensive means of gathering data, maybe more transnational collaborations, so people can be given the same topic and they work on it in their own spaces and combine those results so that they can produce some text that speaks to all the experiences from different parts of the world. That way, I think we will not lose that edge of an anthropological insight. But also, I think the training of students should be emphasizing these new modes of doing anthropology. I don't know if we can continue to have the same kind of research methods that we had before. We need to have new ways of gathering data, of sharing data, of interrogating statements in ways that allow everybody to participate. And as much as possible, help us co-author products with the people that we study. Thank you.
Hey, you can go.
Thank you. I think the very notion of Colonial Anthropology speaks of our finding ways to forge spaces, a multiplicity of spaces, so that more diverse people can participate in the anthropological project. And I don't have a monolithic or consensual model of the anthropological project, although I have always advocated what I call a critical anthropological project. But I recognize that those who disagree with me have every right to participate in the larger anthropological enterprise. Anthropology, and this is from an organizational point of view, worldwide is under assault. The social sciences and humanities are under assault. They are being abolished in universities in Europe and other parts of the world, or if the departments continue to exist, degree granting programs have been basically dismantled. So within the IUES, a lot of our time was spent defending anthropology in various parts of the world, making a case for its existence, its significance, and its future within higher education. Anthropologists in many parts of the world are under assault, in prison, have been targeted by death squads because they dare to speak truth to power and social justice. And I would say even in this country, at this particular moment, we're experiencing what sometimes is called a neo-McCarthyism. So maybe more of us, will be targets for sacking. I mean, my university actually sacked a Palestinian American scholar because of his critique of the Israeli state. Terrible precedent to be made, within the last 5-6 years, but it has implications for how universities and academia in a much broader sense is being reorganized in ways that, on one hand, to accommodate more of us. That's a positive thing, perhaps, although we should not confuse demographic diversity with political or epistemological diversity and decoloniality. They're not the same thing. But also, the restructuring is assuming forms that put many of the units in which anthropologists are hired in jeopardy. So these are things that we need to think about, perhaps, as the structural and institutional and programmatic context within which we make our brilliant epistemological interventions. And I agree with Miranda. I think this is the best of times and maybe the worst of times. It's the best of times because there are precedents that have been made for taking the notion of collaboration and the co-production of knowledge to heart. So it's not a buzzword that gets appropriated and hackneyed in terms of how many times people sort of appropriate that language without changing a darn thing. But I'm very heartened by collaborative work, for instance, coming out of the Latin American Studies Association under the leadership of anthropologist Charlie Hale, the Otros Saberes project, about 7 projects around the Americas where you had Afro-descended, indigenous, and academic anthropologists, some of them in Latin America, a number of them based in the US, working collaboratively around projects that basically were defined by the civil society organizations, the movement organizations, or the communities that were the foci of these projects. And I just think that's so important. The projects that find ways to go beyond the politics of English as a global language. You know, we have journal editors, we have researchers engaged in transnational collaborations, translating works in both directions. I think things in English being translated, for instance, into Portuguese so that Indigenous and Afro-Portuguese graduate students, undergraduates, and activists can have access to the work being done on the African diaspora in places like the United States, and translating the work, for instance, feminist activists in Brazil, Afro-feminist activists in Brazil, and in the Spanish-speaking Americas into English, so those who are not Latin Americaness can sort of expand the contours and the parameters and the perimeters of our understanding of what constitutes Black feminism and Black feminist knowledge production. There's so many fantastic and I think constructive projects being taken to breathe three-dimensional breath into the notion of public engagement, collaboration, and experimental ethnography. I mean, what does that mean? And what do our interlocutors think it should mean? And so we're in a position to take seriously these voices, not just as people who were the old-fashioned human subjects, objects of knowledge from which we mine raw data, but people who themselves are intellectuals, whether of the vernacular sort or just the everyday quotidian sort. We're all intellectual, capable of thinking critically, and we're at a point where I think for anthropology to be refreshed, to be able to be sustainable, we have to go about anthropological practice differently, including the practice of producing theory and theoretical discourses, taken seriously that there are multiple modalities of analysis and theorization. And perhaps if we do want our grandmothers or our cousins or people from our home communities or people from the communities that we have adopted, to be part of the readership and the conversations concerning those texts or those films or those websites, those graphic novels that come out of ethnographic inspiration, then we have to be self-critical, do a cultural critique of ourselves in order to figure out how can we basically remake ourselves as intellectuals of the sort to usher in that next phase of humanity, in which questions of ideas and knowledge and power are central.
Thank you, Faye. Let's hear from Dylan, since we haven't heard from you for a while. Then Tayo can go, and then I'll finish so we can get to the Q&A. I know you all probably have a million questions. So Dylan, please share the tension between pessimism and optimism.
Sure. In brief, I mean, I tend to be pretty optimistic. At the same time, I'm in a lucky position to be in an applied department that is dealing with and talking about a lot of these issues and have been talking about some of these issues when it comes to anthropology for quite a while now. But I think, you know, as anybody who has been working a lot this year on especially applied projects having to do with COVID-19 and the pandemic, it's been a tough year to find things to be optimistic about. But at the same time, because I've been in these sort of quick moving, immediate anthropological intervention style projects this year that have been a lot of collaboration with lots of different folks and with lots of different interlocutors. And it's also been, I think, because of that, a year to find some optimism in terms of what we can do, you know, with the field. And it sounds maybe a little cliche, but I think we need anthropology now as much as probably ever before. And so it has to do with things like, inclusion and who is being included in this project and who is being excluded, how are things being framed. Obviously I think the best thing anthropology is going for it. One of the best things is that we're openly self-critical, and we have, plenty of openness about, at least I hope we can be open about the ways that we understand ourselves and the work that we do. It's one of the most important things about working on a good team of people, is that, you can call each other out on your biases and such, and that's proven to be really great. But the other thing, actually, I'll just say the last thing is we're still obviously learning. And a year ago, I don't know if anybody would have imagined that we would have all been together on this thing called Zoom. I'm not sure if I knew what Zoom was a year ago, but here we are. And I think that, again, is enough to give me some hope and some optimism. So with that, I'll turn it over here to my colleague, Tayo.
Thank you. Let me preface this by saying that I am in an Africana Studies unit in the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies at University of South Florida. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that, but it's important to actually keep this in mind. I'm not in an anthropology department. I have a number of points to speak to, so please bear with me if I will try as best as I can to stay within the 2 minutes. First, the term diversity and also inclusion, I find it to be dangerous. There is a danger to a celebration of difference where difference and authority no longer becomes meaningful. And this is a point that came up in reverse gaze itself. So this question brings up to me, do we actually want to participate? Do we want to call for inclusion? Do we want to, call for a diversity within a problematic system? So that's one. And as much as anthropology is openly self-critical, we're also openly self-congratulatory. And, as much as we call out our biases and we call each other out, these biases persist, and they have persisted for years, to the extent that, as not just within the discipline, but in this broader world, as Nadej just pointed out, this is not the first moment, the first era of Black Lives Matter, right? As far as where I stand, I, being in an Africana Studies program, being in a essentially a Black studies paradigm, I stand for my people. That's where I stand. And I would say, drawing on the performance studies theorist, Jose Munoz, I disidentify with anthropology. I disidentify with anthropology because the discipline, like this world, is not faithful to my freedom. So I navigate within the discipline, taking what I need, extracting what I need. And I'm not necessarily committed to an anthropological project. I am committed to the liberation and freedom of myself and my people. That's it. And I don't know who said this, who brought this to my sphere, but someone said that decolonization is necessarily extractive. Right? So Dr. Harrison, you've pointed out like the pitfalls of an extractive anthropology, where we are extracting the knowledges and the resources anthropologists are from the people that we are studying. And we can actually use those same methodologies in service of our liberation, participating in a system in which we're not necessarily valued, but taking from it what we need and taking it back, right, to our people, to our communities, so that we can actually work together in the service of our freedom. And the unique thing, in addition to paying attention to the histories of work done on Black lives and Black freedom, there is something very unique about this moment, about this activist moment. And there are a number of things to point out. First of all, there's a politics of formation in terms of querying who is on the front lines, who is putting their bodies on the line. That is who you follow, right? That's who you follow. You follow people on the ground, placing their bodies on the line, right? And in addition to that, there is a disavowal of respectability politics. There's a disavowal of the assumption, right, of what it means to be human. There's a disavowal of the idea that you need to be respectable, that you need to present in a certain way to have your life, your value recognized, right? And so this calls for what some of my colleagues have called fugitive anthropology. So if activists on the ground are querying the politics of solidarity and the politics of allyship and calling not for allies, but for accomplices, right? And think of that word, accomplice, right? An accomplice is someone who is participating with you in the commitment of a crime, right? So that means that the work of liberation renders us, invites us all to fugitivity, right? So what is called for in this moment is a fugitive anthropology, or I like to think of it as an underground, like, going into the underground, retreating from this world, this system, not faithful to our freedom, and extracting from it and taking what we need in order to seek our freedom. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tayo. I'm going to wrap it up because I want us to have about 30 minutes of Q&A. So in terms of the future looking forward, I'm the least senior on this panel. So my perspective is going to be different because I have the least amount of experience in the field. But when it comes to this text, I was happy after reading it because it reminded me of why we do what we do. So I invite those of you who haven't read the text to put this on your syllabi, to read it, to take notes. I think it's important for the next generation of anthropologists like myself to read refreshing texts like this one. As for the field, American anthropology is an extension of American culture, which is rooted in, classism and racism. And we have to think about the political economy of anthropology and how it's been used to depict third world countries to reify certain policies concerning development and intervention. And I think that first the change would have to be outward first. So meaning American culture would have to change first, and then it would spread to American anthropology. In this book, Mwenda, you mentioned how you had group mates in a class who were unable to adequately complete an ethnographic project on a local African-American community, yet scholars want to go conduct research abroad. You have people who are culturally alienated to the Black experience in the US, and I think people need to wake up. But we see people who are challenging these skewed, unnuanced, ethnocentric narratives. And you can see in the flyer that I made for this event, there's a Black woman being photographed while someone behind her is capturing her from the back. So for those of us who have access to multimodal devices, AKA cell phones, people are recording wrongful policing of Black lives. So we must now be wary of artificial intelligence that's coming for us now. But we have been raising our voices, and this is tying to the AAA event series theme. From the hashtag Black in the Ivory to hashtag Black Lives Matter. I think we're in an interesting time, and I look forward to reading more scholarship that challenges anti-Blackness while also celebrating different cultures. I hope that I will be one of those writers imparting this one day.